Welcome to Career Tools. This week, DISC and presentation downfalls, high D. The questions this cast answers are, what are high Ds likely to forget when presenting? And how do high Ds increase effectiveness when presenting?
Folks, about a month ago, we launched MT Disc, our version of a DISC instrument. Probably the big news for most people is rather than having to charge you $70 to $80, we're only charging you $30 because we don't have to pay anybody else for the darn instrument. We made it ourselves. And early results after 1,000 people taking MT Disc is that our data are highly valid, and we're excited about that. One thing you may notice if you've taken Disc from our previous vendor, Wiley, we don't have any numbers on our output. You're not going to get a 2 or a 7 or a 5 or a 6 in your D, I, S, and C score. A lot of people have written me recently about that, and our answer is very straightforward. The numbers imply a level of scientific precision that we don't believe is accurate, and even worse, in our opinion, it's misleading. If you're a 7711, like I am, a high D, high I, and you're trying to figure out how you're going to interact with someone who's a 6622, also a high D, high I, that difference between the 7s and 6s and the 1s and 2s is impossible to determine in day-to-day life. It may be scientifically valid based on validity tests and the law of large numbers and so on, but the fact is that you won't be able to tell the difference because it's only a general assessment. And you don't really need to know whether you're a 7, a 6, or a 5. What you need to know is what your tendency is, what you tend to be strong in and weaker in, so that you can make adjustments. And of course, working with other human beings, which is the point of DISC, especially those who are different than you, is not about precision. It's about awareness. It's about awareness of where you are on a map and where they might be on a map and what behaviors you have to change. And in the typical 30 to 40 page documents that you'll get in the output, if you take the MT Disc, and I recommend you do, the final 2/3 or longer is actually all about changes you can make to your own behavior. Because you want to remember that your behavior isn't right. It isn't necessarily effective in all situations. It's just yours. And sometimes high Ds have to do non-high D things and high S's have to do non-high S things. You have to adjust based on your audience. And that's part of the reason we got rid of the numbers. So I hope you come to the website and check it out.
So before we start, we better define what a high D is for all the people that don't know. If you do know, you can fast forward for a minute while we explain it. So high D is one of the profiles of the DISC model, which is a model of behavior and communication styles. There are 4 profiles, D, I, S, and C. D and I have something in common. They're both assertive. They're the people that are likely to speak up and interrupt you. S and C have something in common. They're both reserved, and so they're the people who are likely to wait until you finish speaking before they speak. Then D and C have something in common. They are both task-focused, which means they have a list of things to do, and they're checking it off. And I and S have something in common. They are people-focused, which means they want to know how the people are doing. They want to be friends with you. So the 4 profiles are either assertive or reserved, task-focused or people-focused, and that gives you 4 profiles. And high Ds are task-focused and assertive, which means they have a list and they are going to run over anybody who is in the way of doing it. And I can say that because I am one. We have a lot of podcasts about DISC. We also have training about DISC.
That was a very high I thing. Yeah. To exaggerate how many podcasts we have.
Right. I caught it from you.
Yes.
We have lots more information on our website. So just go and put in DISC in the search bar and you'll find lots of more information in depth about DISC. But if you know you're a high D and you are about to do some presentations, this is the cast for you. This is the things that you will forget to do, or the places where you will run roughshod over people and put them off and fail to persuade them. And we want to stop you from doing that.
Absolutely.
And there's no good profile for presenting. Every profile has strengths and weaknesses. There isn't a best profile for presenting, although high Is probably have it easiest. They like being in front of a crowd and talking. High Ds and high Is are likely to be the ones who speak up, so they probably have more practice at presenting, but that doesn't mean they're the best by any way. And any of us can behave any way we like if we think about it first. So that means even as a high D, you can behave differently in order to make your presentations more effective.
Yeah. And presentations come in a variety of types. Sometimes we think of presentations as those motivational speakers, right? That get you to come up and do trust falls and beat a drum or whatever those things
Walk
are.
over fire.
Walk over fire, yeah. There are also educational presentations. There are briefings, instructive presentations, problem solving, so on and so on. This guidance focuses on the most common form of business presentations, the ones where you have to persuade a group to agree to your proposal or your idea. Our outline for today is number 1, consider your audience. Number 2, set the context. Number 3 is be prepared to be interrupted. Number 4 is slow down. And number 5 is use the secret weapon, the pre-wire.
There's nothing like a secret weapon.
That's right.
But first is consider your audience, because it's the most important one. The secret weapon is not the most important one, unfortunately. But we are going to say this in every, the high D cast happens to come first because we always do things in order, DISC. So the high D one is coming first, and we are going to say consider your audience to every profile, because if you don't consider the audience, then your presentation has a, 90% chance of failure. You have to think about who is in the audience.
Yeah, you can't be a good presenter regardless of your profile if you're not thinking of your audience. We say all the time, communication is what the listener does. If you're not thinking about your listener, right, your message is likely to fall flat. So sending the message sending the information in a way that makes sense to the listener is just good sense. It just makes sense. That's how you make sure that it's easily digested by them, right? And that's what it's about. Presenting is about the audience. It's not about the presenter.
Yeah, it's whether or not you get change, the change you want in this case. And high Ds are likely to act like the stereotype ugly American. So when a French person doesn't understand this stereotype, he doesn't try to speak French. He just speaks American louder and more slowly. And hope that somehow this will then translate into French. I don't know.
Right. If I don't know what those words mean, I'm not going to know them when you say them louder.
Yes, exactly. And it doesn't help. So what any profile tends to do, if you don't think about the audience, is you double down on your own profile. You double down on what you would want. And for a high D, that's go fast. Just tell me the bottom line up front and I'll make a decision. But the other profiles don't want that. And they will be turned off by that kind of presentation, and you won't persuade them to what you want them to be persuaded to. And so that means adapting to your audience, including information that's important to them, even if it's not to you, and structuring the information in a way that makes sense to them.
Yeah, sometimes you'll get questions, or you'll get blank looks from people who are of other profiles, and you think the answer is to use less words, right? Make it more direct.
Yes.
And what they're looking for is the nuance, is more of an explanation, right? And so that's a pitfall.
And it's not just their disc profile that you need to consider. Unless you have an entirely homogenous audience with only one disc profile or maybe two, it's going to be really difficult to cater to just the disc profiles. So you want to keep the different profiles in mind, because it helps you find the places where you're going to be deficient, because you know where your emphasis is, and therefore your emphasis is the opposite of that.
Right.
But also you need to think about the other attributes of the audience.
Right. Like, for instance, just how many people you're presenting to. A larger or smaller audience will dictate how much interactivity you can expect or plan for. The more people in your audience, the more likely you are to get a few people who are willing to chime in or interject or have questions. You also want to consider how much specific knowledge does this audience have. This would dictate the level of detail you can expect your audience to understand. That's one of the things that we have a challenge with as presenters here. We have some folks who attend our sessions who have never even heard of us. They've never listened to a podcast. And then we have people who join our sessions and attend who have listened since the first year of the podcast. They've listened for 16 years. So those are varying levels of knowledge that audience has. Yeah, absolutely. So we talked about how much specific knowledge, but how much general knowledge does this audience have? This dictates how much time you'll need to spend on the background or setting the stage or giving some of that additional context, and we'll talk about that. You also need to consider, why do the audience believe that they're attending this presentation? This dictates how much time you'll need to spend directing their attention where it needs to be.
The difference between a meeting of your team who thought you were going to walk them through a proposal that had already been agreed and, walking them through something, a better idea you've had or a different idea or a different stream entirely.
Yep.
Those are two different audiences and two different presentations.
Yeah, absolutely. Another good one, and this I love this point. What else is the audience doing on this day, right? Because we see this. An audience who is on site, who's, invested in the whole day. Maybe they traveled to this. I mean, they're here just for this presentation. You're going to have a lot more of their attention, a lot more of their focus versus virtually. When you have people who are attending a presentation virtually and they have all of their other stuff on their computer, their email, their notifications, their Slack, all of that stuff. So certainly you're going to see a difference there.
Yeah, the difference between a 45-minute meeting and an afternoon set aside to go into some topic in depth, for example.
Yeah.
It's not just the time, it's the proportion of the day as well that dictates how much attention you have.
Another thing that I think is helpful, just as another example, is sometimes we'll get groups, we'll have a client event and the client will let us know, hey, just so you know, that group or most of the people in that group, let's say the session starts at noon, for example, they're going to be just coming out of an all hands meeting most of the morning. Well, that's good to know, right? That audience, probably a little hungry, right? Probably going to be a little cranky.
Yes.
Those types of things. You got to understand where they're coming from, what
behavior.
They're doing.
Yeah,
exactly.
Hungry means not concentrating.
Right. Borderline hangry. Some of those questions.
Exactly. Yeah. One of the biggest weaknesses of high Ds is their lack of appreciation, our lack of appreciation, since I am one, of perspectives and thoughts and feelings of others. It's like the solution is obvious. Why are you getting upset about it? Well,
right.
And a high D doesn't naturally put themselves in the shoes of someone else. And we find it difficult to do that. We think there's one logical answer and why would anybody want to do something else? So if you can do that, if you can put yourself in the shoes of the audience, if you can think about what kind of mindset they're going to be in during your presentation, that helps you tailor the presentation to be more persuasive because it's meeting them where they are.
Yeah, absolutely.
Folks, our public conferences have started to sell out as the world comes back to normal. And so I thought I'd just remind you again of upcoming public events we have. You're probably listening to this cast sometime in April. And on April 26th and 27th, Sarah, who runs our public conference business, will be in London for an EMC and an ECC. We will then be in Minneapolis the 3rd and 4th of May. We will be in Jersey City, New Jersey, the 10th and 11th of May. And Austin, Texas, the 17th and 18th of May. We'll also have a virtual Effective Communicator Conference on the 4th of May, and we're starting a virtual Effective Manager Conference on the 25th of May. You probably know this by now. We've told you enough times, so we're sorry to say it over and over again, but our virtual EMCs for public events are 4 2 to 2.5 hour sessions spread over probably a week or two. So that last one in May starts on the 25th of May. I hope you come to the website and learn more. And if you need to ask us questions, send emails to customerservice@manager-tools.com. Hope to see you at one of those events.
Our next point is set the context. So you high Ds, and I love you, just so you know, I love all of you high Ds.
We don't want to be loved.
No, you don't want that love. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. But don't skip the background. It's your natural inclination to get straight to the point because that's what you value. And as a Heidi, you want other people to eliminate all the other minutia and details and get straight to the heart of the matter. To your mind, 75% of the information anyone gives is unnecessary, is not needed. It's only the 20% that is useful in making a decision and moving forward. And you can make decisions with very little information. That's what makes you so great at making decisions. Heidis can take that risk and be willing to say, I don't need all the information, because you just don't worry about that. But other profiles don't work this way. Instead of getting straight to the point, they need to hear the background. They need to hear it kind of teed up for them, right? High I's and high S's need to know who have you talked to and whether those people are on board with the changes that you propose. You know, have their thoughts or their teams, have they been considered throughout this process or in this change?
And the I's and S's come at it from different perspectives, but they end up in the same place, which is who have you talked to and what did they say? Which is that high I wants to know, have you included everybody he thinks is important? Because, you know, if there's somebody who's left out, why not invite them to the party?
Yeah.
A high S wants to know that everybody is ready to move forward together, that change or something new is accepted and everybody's ready to do that.
Yeah.
The outcome is the same for you. As part of the scene setting, you need to talk about who you've talked to and what they said. In other words, I have run my proposal past this team that's going to be affected. The team leaders bought in. I've agreed to do training with them. We're all good.
Yeah. I've considered how this is going to impact downstream so-and-so's team. This is how we're going to mitigate that. All of that type of stuff. Yeah. High C's are another good example. High C's need the background data. They need to know what led you to make that decision. It's not enough to say that, you know, this one data point is what we're hinging our whole decision on. What's the source of that data? Let's get into the details. They need to understand what data you're not using, right? Why did you discard that data? There are pieces of information that, you know, you are deeming irrelevant. Why? You know, they want to know more about that. The High C needs to know that you've considered them and their thought process. It's not enough just to present them with the endpoint, the decision. They need to understand the journey, but the journey being the data, right? The information, not necessarily the people, like a high S.
Yeah. My dad is a high C and he comes to my house every, I don't know, year or so because he lives in England and I live in America, and I have a list of things for my dad to do. And I'm like, I want a shelf put here. And he's like, okay, what for? I'm like, it doesn't matter what for. I want a shelf there. Yes, but what for? Because then that tells me how heavy you're going to put something on it, and that affects how long the screws are that I'm going to need. And I'm like, I just want a shelf. And then he's, you know, where are you going to get the shelf from? I'm going to go to Lowe's. I'm going to buy the shelf that's the right length, that's in stock. And he's like, yeah, but, and he's got like this list of questions. How thick will it be? And it drives me nuts. But I have to say, I try and put a shelf up. There's a 90% chance it'll fall off the wall. If my dad puts a shelf up, there's a 90% chance it will stay on the wall. So his questions actually make sense in the long run. I just don't want to consider them. So if you're presenting a proposal, you're going to go through the same thing. A high C is going to ask you a bunch of questions that you didn't think about, that you didn't think were relevant, and you don't care about. Yeah. But in the end, if you listen to them, if you're patient with them, if you answer their questions, you will have a better product.
Yeah. I'm going to use that. That's a great thing. High D. Just shelf there.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what I want. Yeah. Another thing that's important for you high Ds is to be prepared to be interrupted. And that's our next point. You want to get, it's just your way. You want to get from point A to point B as quickly as possible. And in the case of a presentation, B is the part where you tell the audience what you want them to know, they agree with you, and you all move on to something new. This makes interruptions annoying, particularly when they begin with, these words are the high D. I mean, they're nails on a chalkboard.
They are, absolutely.
Can we go back to, high Ds? Or can you give me more detail on, the high Ds are just going, No. If you weren't paying attention.
No. Yeah. No. If you weren't paying attention, we all did that, Paige. It's not my fault you're slow. No.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We know what's running through your head at this point, and we can assure you that saying it out loud will not help you.
Ask me how I know that.
Mhm.
So don't sigh or roll your eyes or otherwise show that you're frustrated with the interruption. The interrupting and questioning process is part of the process of
Oh, yeah.
persuading people. You have to believe it to be necessary in order to get to where you want to get to.
Yeah, you have to expect it.
Yeah, just like a train has to stop at stations, it would get there faster if it didn't stop at the stations. It would also be pointless because trains
Nobody would be,
exist
yeah.
to get for people to get in and on and off and to go places. So a train
Right.
has to expect to stop. You have to expect that there will be questions and interruptions. So when you're interrupted, when somebody says, "Can we just go back?" you just stop and smile and say, "I'm sorry, go ahead."
Wendy, did you say smile?
Yes.
High Ds are
smile.
not smilers.
No, we're not smilers, but we
Yeah.
can learn to smile. And guess
That's
what?
right.
People think that you appreciate their question when you smile, even if you
Mhm.
don't. And if they think that you appreciate their question, they will be more on your side when it comes to the bit of persuasion.
Yep. So when a question is asked, catch the medicine ball and just take it, right? And, this technique is all about, again, I know facial expressions, you may not think of them as something that is a behavior and is something that you can change. That's a lot of people think that my face is just my face.
Yes.
That's who I am. But you can absolutely change how your face reacts to information. You can change what you say, the entire way that your body is moving, right? Your body language. And it's best to reduce the contentiousness of questions during a presentation because it's inevitable that when people ask questions, usually it's because you weren't clear or because, and you can get defensive.
Mhm.
You've got to stop that.
Or you were perfectly clear and they didn't understand.
Yeah,
Right?
absolutely.
When people say you weren't clear, no, I was perfectly clear. I understood what I was saying.
Right.
You didn't
Exactly.
understand what I was saying. But people use that phrase, "it wasn't clear," to mean I didn't understand. And pointing it out to them is not helpful. Although I
It's
just
not
did
helpful.
to Andrew. But pointing that out in a presentation where you're trying to be persuasive is not helpful.
Right.
So this medicine ball technique is a whole thing. it's a whole body experience. And there's an entire podcast about it. So if you go to the website and look up answering questions in a presentation, Mark goes into extreme detail about how to do this. So we're not going to fit it in here, but
Right.
remember the medicine ball technique because that is the way to reduce the contentiousness of questions during a presentation.
Yeah. And showing willingness to answer questions, being open to interruptions, especially early on in your presentation, and this is counterintuitive, it makes them less likely to occur later. So do it. Be
The
open
more
to it.
receptive you are to questions in the beginning, the less likely it is they will ask questions later because they'll start to trust you.
Exactly. Our next point is slow down. High Ds speak more quickly than the other styles. Specifically, high Ds and high Is, more assertive profiles speak more quickly. It's the assertive part of being a high D. You move fast, you think fast, you talk fast. The problem with this is not just that others can't think as fast as you can speak, but when new information is presented or information we already knew in a different way, we have to kind of create or somehow meld our brain around this new information, right? And that takes time. When presented with new information, it's just something that our brains are not quick to wrap our heads around.
So if we tell you, think of a house, everybody thought of a house, everybody has an image in their head of a house. But if we now say it's a 3-story brownstone, you have to change that mental image. You have to relocate it. If you saw a farmhouse on the prairie, you have to make it taller and change the color. And that all takes a few seconds. And the problem with presenting is you already know the information. You know how it fits. You've done this work already. And so you're just blasting through it. Everybody else is doing it for the first time. So this is why you have to slow down.
Absolutely. So slow down. And the best way to slow down is to rehearse. You would think that rehearsing would make you faster, would increase your speed. since you know the words that you're going to say, you can speak them more quickly, right?
Mhm.
That's the natural thought here. But that's only partly true, because knowing the words allows you to stop thinking about the words, about what you're going to say, and think about all the other things, right? The words coming naturally make it so you can focus your energy or your attention on other things, right? Like your pauses,
Your facial expression.
your facial expressions,
Part of the reason we
the
say,
facial expressions of the audience.
yeah, part of the reason we say, oh, I can't change my face is because we don't think about it, because we're thinking about other things. If you're not thinking about the words you're saying, you have 5 brain cells to think about your facial expression.
Yeah.
So if you know something really well, if you think of the Pledge of Allegiance, you could say that more slowly because you don't have to think about the words. You could say at any speed you like, as long as you start with, I pledge allegiance. Oh,
Yep.
I had forgotten it then. As long as you start with I pledge allegiance, your brain just keeps going like a train on the track, and you don't think about the words, but you could say it slowly or loudly or fast or with a silly accent because you know those words so well. So rehearsing and knowing what you're going to say allows you to free up that bandwidth for all of the other things that you could be thinking about and that will make you more effective.
I do this with my kids. They, say their ABCs, right? And it's rote. It's just they do it and it's like this routine. But because I've done it much more than they have, because I'm older, they'll say LMNO as like one syllable, and I can say LMNO, right, to try to correct them because I've done it for so much or for so many times. Yeah. So this brings us to our last point. I don't know why I brought that up about that's a high I thing. Our last point here is to use the secret weapon, the pre-wire. So to get to your desired endpoint in a presentation, we talked about this, the part where you tell the audience what you want them to know, they agree with you, you all move on to something new. To do this the most quickly, the secret really isn't in the presentation. It's in getting agreement before the presentation, using the pre-wire technique. The very, very short version of the pre-wire, and we have a podcast on this, is once you draft the presentation, ask for a meeting with all the key people.
One at a time, like not a meeting where they're all. It's not clear from what we've said here.
Yeah.
But each of them. So you meet with each one singly,
individually,
before the big meeting where they're all in it.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you, Wendy. Also, something to consider here when you're thinking of key people is people who are obviously stakeholders. But if you're presenting, you may want to, depending on your level of DISC knowledge and DISC awareness, you may want to consider making sure you have a representation of the profiles, right?
Yes.
So individually, you're going to review your presentation with them and you're going to ask them for feedback. You're going to ask them for input. What do you think? What are your questions, right? And you answer their questions and you discuss any points that are contentious and you work towards them agreeing with your proposal before you're even presenting it, right? Then what you do is you make changes to your presentation and take account of those discussions. When you give your presentation for real, right? Then there should be less questions because you've answered them already, or you'll be able to head those questions off because you know that people are thinking of this. And agreement at this point is a slam dunk. It's easy because the audience was already aware of the proposal and they had already agreed to it. This is the fastest way to get to that desired endpoint.
And there is a podcast about the pre-wire technique again, which has a whole bunch more detail, including some things to make it successful, to give yourself a higher chance of success. So make sure to listen to that one as well. So we've given you homework, the pre-wire and the medicine ball technique. You need to go do that.
Yeah.
No profile is better than any of the others. The D's are the best, clearly. But we tell everybody, no profile is better than the others. And we can all be great presenters. We just have to limit our personal weaknesses. And in our case, in the high D's case, that means thinking about the audience, giving more detail than you would naturally, being ready to be interrupted and handle it gracefully and slow down. It's easy. Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks, Wendy.
That's all for this week. We'll be back next week with a new topic.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.